Okay, so I moved out of the forest because the leaves are really dry. It hasn't rained in about a week or so. We got some rain coming in tonight, but that doesn't do any good right now. They are really dry and there's a wind picking up. And I caught some paper patching from the last shot that I fired, smoldering in the leaves. So I didn't want to start a forest fire. So I've moved out here onto the open road, and there's a muddy spot between me and the target. So anything that gets past this road, which it won't go that far, but anything it does is going to hit that mud and it'll stop. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but I got a target set up out there right on the ground up against a dead tree at 60 yards. And this just proves my point. If I was going to be out here deer hunting, that's about as far away as I would get an opportunity to shoot at one. Now I can see a little farther, but I wouldn't be able to tell, is that a deer or a cow or a dog or a person wearing a tan jacket? Out here in this forest, and also remember, I'm in an open road, so there's open space between me and the edge of that road. If we were out in the middle of the forest, I probably wouldn't even be able to see a target that far away. So for me, out here where I live, hunt, shoot, having a rifled barrel would really be of no practical value whatsoever. And that's my rant on that. This video was going to be about rifling versus smoothbore. Does rifling really provide any serious advantage over a smoothbore for most people, the way most people shoot? And my position on that, based on just my opinion, don't have any empirical data, surveys, or research to back it up, but just a feeling that I have is that if you took the rifling barrel off of most people's guns and put on an identical barrel with no rifling, most people would probably never notice the difference. Rifling comes in handy at extreme range when extreme accuracy is required, but within normal shooting range, like that target that you may not even be able to see out here, which I can barely see, is 60 yards away. And that's about as far as I'm ever going to shoot. I mean, even back when I was deer hunting, I was an avid hunter back when I was younger, when it was fun. Now it's just too much work. I don't do it anymore. But back then, when I was hunting, that's about as far away as I ever took a deer. In fact, the first deer I ever took was right about where that mound of dirt is there, right just about that far, about 10, 20 yards maybe, with a smoothbore 12 gauge shotgun firing a hollow point slug. And so between there and that target at 60 yards is about as far as I've ever shot. And in fact, our public target range here in the area, the farthest range it has, farthest or longest, is 100 yards. And at 100 yards, rifling really isn't going to give you that much of an advantage. I don't think anyway. And then when we're talking about extreme accuracy at extreme range, what we're talking about is 600 yards, 400, 500 yards, or more. I can't even see 600 yards. And when is the last time you went outside, saw something off in the distance that you didn't know how far away it was, didn't use some trick like, your thumb in shadow of the sun or anything like that, didn't use a laser rangefinder, you just standing there looking at it thinking, how far away is that? And you accurately guessed it, 600 yards, and then you pace it out and it's 575, 625. Most people would guess it at about 400 yards if it was 600, or around 800 yards, which means they'd set their sights incorrectly. They didn't have a computer controlled laser rangefinder scope and they actually had to use their calibrated eyes to aim. They would set their sights incorrectly and the bullet would fall a couple 100 feet short or a couple 100 feet over their head. The rifling wouldn't make any difference. The rifling only comes into play, again, at extreme range when extreme accuracy is required and you've got the right amount of elevation so that you can lob it in an arc at the target. If I set this musket up perfectly parallel to the curve of the earth and fired it and then dropped an identical bullet at the muzzle, at exactly the same time, those two balls would hit the ground at exactly the same time. The only difference is one would be laying on the ground here in front of the muzzle, and one would be about 100 yards or so down range, but they would hit the ground at the same time. After that, you've got to use what some people call Pennsylvania elevation. You've got to elevate your barrel so you can lob that bullet in an arc. That's called ballistics, trajectory. There's a whole science behind it. You can do some research on it if you're not familiar with it. And if you've ever watched the classic example of the advantage of rifling, they show a football in flight, slow motion, flying across the stadium, right, spiraling away, nice straight line, and it's going in an arc. It's because if the quarterback threw it straight at the recipient, whoever that is, it just hit the ground 100 feet or so in front of the guy. So you got to lob it in an arc. The more arc, the greater the distance, up to about 45 degrees. Then you start increasing height, but your distance decreases up to 90 degrees. Then you go like straight up and straight down. Rotation of the earth and wind and all that not included, theoretically speaking, meaning. So you've got to know how much elevation to give at extreme distance. And to do that, you got to know the distance. Rifling isn't going to tell you that. Rifling's not going to make up any differences or any errors in your calculations. If I guess something 600 yards out and it's 400 yards and I set my sights at 400 yards, having a rifled barrel is not going to make up that extra 200 yards. It's just going to hit 200 yards in front of the target. Duh. At extreme range and at extreme accuracy is required. Another thing to consider, a human-sized target, let's say I'm wearing a white shirt, okay? Let's say I'm wearing an orange shirt. At 250 yards is just a teeny tiny little dot out on the horizon. Teeny tiny. I can barely see the red center on the target that I've got set up out there against that stump or against that dead tree. And that's red. And that's 60 yards. Imagine 3 times that far, 4 times that far out there. First, I wouldn't even be able to see it because the trees are in the way. So it wouldn't do me any good. And then if I was out in the open, it'd just be a tiny little dot. Yeah, if I knew it was 250 yards and I knew how much elevation to give, rifling would definitely make a difference. And before you start writing a 500-word essay about how these things are only accurate out to about 50 to 80 to 100 yards anyway, and after that it's a crapshoot, that seems to be a myth that only Americans believe in. Over in Europe, they don't believe that. And maybe they invented firearms, so maybe they know something about smoothbore guns that we don't. A Marine standing on the deck of Ship A in the 18th century was expected to be able to regularly hit a man-sized target standing on the deck of Ship B 300 yards away. Not 50, 300. And armies across Europe in this time frame routinely sighted their muskets in at 250 yards. Now, it's an historic fact. That's in the record. And in the 18th century, a group of engineers decided to collect some empirical data about accuracy of smoothbore, particularly the brown bess, different calibers, different lengths of barrels, different types of projectiles. They took a very methodical, scientific approach to it. And they started their testing out at 400 yards. Now think about this. If you know for a fact that the guns you're going to be testing are only accurate out to about 100 yards at the most, and after that it's just a crapshoot, why would you start at 4 times that distance? So Anyway, that is my position. Is obviously if you live out in more open country, the plains, the Rocky Mountains, Montana, somewhere like that, where you routinely are going to have to aim at more than 600 yards, then yes, rifling is definitely the way to go. For most people who use handguns for self-defense, for carrying them, rifling is just completely worthless. For self-defense, self-defense distance is like this, arm length. What good is a rifled barrel going to do me at that length? Absolutely none. Okay, a mall shooter, 180 yards, whatever, down, quarter of a mile, whatever. Yes, but you got to be a good enough marksman to hit something that far before the rifling is any real advantage. For those of us, like 95%, maybe I'm going to guess, maybe 98% of the people who own guns and shoot, we're not in that category. A rifled barrel is going to be of absolutely no use to us whatsoever. And I think I'm proving that now. I'm missing the target just as easily with a smooth bore as I would with a rifled bore. That doesn't sound right, but it's kind of the truth. So let me clean this up and we'll do one more shot because the the wind is picking up and the leaves are dry. Just not a good day to be out shooting. And I learned a long time ago, when things aren't going your way, get out of the forest. So one more shot and then I'm out of here. One more. Target's still up. Yes, I can barely see it, but we'll see what I can do. I'm not going to do a kneeling position. Okay, forget these small holes. These are buckshot. I've got 2 rounds here, hit it really close together. One here and one here. So 1, 2, 3, 4 shots. Kills, maybe, maybe not. A couple of them are anyway. Good enough to bring a deer home and put some venison on the table, but there's no way that can be considered good shooting. Not even fair. And it's not the musket, it's the shooter. It's the person holding the gun. I'm suffering from flinch lock syndrome. I got to get over, and you can see I'm pulling to the left on it. So, of course, with the buckshot load that I fired earlier, look, I got 2 in the red. And that definitely would have brought home a deer. So would this one. So with buckshot, I could definitely bring the venison home, or the turkey, or the duck, or whatever. That's all for today. So thanks for watching, and see you next week. And that was an example of a flash in the pan. There we are. They don't shoot very well on half cock. Ah! Oh! Oh! Mm. Got my finger underneath that hammer. Oh! Boy, I'm going to lose that nail for sure.